introduction. The evening will be in three parts. I'll be giving you, hopefully not too thorough an introduction, but sufficient for you to follow the reading of the extracts from the three Pushkin pieces we'll be doing later on. So first my introduction, then we'll have the musical interlude, or will be really a prelude to a reading from the three pieces. In two of those, we'll be also hearing from Alla Gelik in the Russian. Among Pushkin's outstanding poetic creations, three works stand out. Their titles don't refer to living creatures. They indicate a statue or a sculptural image. And in each case, the epithet denotes the material from which the statue or the sculpture is made. These works are the little tragedy, The Stone Guest, the narrative poem, The Bronze Horseman, and the tale of the Golden Cockerel. The phenomenon of statues in Pushkin's poetic output was pointed out for the first time by the distinguished philologist Roman Jakobson in his book, The Statue in Pushkin's Mythology, a work that was published in 1937. The statue works have other similarities. Their contents were derived from foreign sources. The Stone Guest lists among its sources Molière's play Don Juan and Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. The Bronze Horseman was initially started by Pushkin as a response to the poetic cycle of the Polish poet Adam Mickiewicz, which was very hostile towards Peter the Great and his creation, St. Petersburg. And in 1933, Anna Akhmatova established that the tale of the Golden Cockerel was based on the American writer Washington Irving's novella, The Legend of the Arabian Astrologer, from his Tales of Alhambra. In all three works, the action takes place in capital cities. The other remarkable feature common to the three works is that they were all written during the Baldiner autumns of 1830, 1833, and 1834. The Stone Guest belongs to the rich harvest of the first Baldiner autumn in 1830. The Bronze Horseman was the outstanding work of the second autumn in 1833. And the tale of the Golden Cockerel was the only work written during the last and least fruitful Baldiner autumn of 1834. These autumn stays in Baldiner occupy a truly exceptional place in Pushkin's life. The first stay was a consequence of his proposing to Natalia Goncharova in the spring of 1830. This led to Pushkin's father transferring part of the Baldiner estate to him. The stay of 1833 happened after the conclusion of Pushkin's journey to the Volga and Ural provinces. These were the areas of Pugachev's rebellion in 1773 to 1775. This journey resulted in Pushkin's writing of a history of the Pugachev rebellion in 1834. The last stay in the autumn of 1834 was at a particularly unhappy stage in his life. Let me briefly remind you of the events leading up to this, as Pushkin's reaction to these events found both dramatic and poetic expression in the tale of the Golden Cockerel. At the beginning of 1834, Pushkin had been appointed to the court post of Gentleman of the Chamber, or Kammerjunker, which is rather indecent at my age, he wrote. Generally, this post was reserved for men in their early 20s, and Pushkin was deeply offended by the Tsar's gracious favor. Indeed, he found it humiliating. Worse was to follow. His letters to his wife were intercepted by the police, and one of them was passed to Tsar Nicholas I to read. The poet had written to his wife, I've seen 3 Tsars. The first commanded me to remove my baby cap. This was Tsar Paul I. Pushkin was less than 2 years old at the time. The second didn't like me at all. This was Tsar Alexander I, who had sent Pushkin into exile. The third made me a page boy in my old age. This letter resulted in an official warning to Pushkin against showing disrespect for the sovereign. Pushkin wrote in his diary, "The police open her husband's private letters to his wife and bring them to the Tsar. And the Tsar, a well brought up and honorable man, is not ashamed to admit it." Pushkin's response was formally to request Tsar Nicholas I to relieve him of any official duties and to allow him to retire to the country. He only asked that the Tsar allow him to continue working in the state archives so as to complete his history of Peter the Great. The Tsar answered icily that he had no intention of keeping the poet in government service against his will, but that a private individual could not be allowed access to the state archives. Pushkin had no choice but to retract his request for retirement. His poetic response to his encounter with the Tsar was the poem, "It's time, my love, it's time. Para, mój drug, para." It's possible that the poem, "May God grant that I lose not my mind," Nie daj mnie Bóg zajти z uma, was also written in response to this encounter with the Tsar, although the precise dating of that poem is uncertain. There is a clue to Pushkin's mental and physical state in the 6th and 7th lines of Para, mój drug, para. Long have I dreamt of Eden. Long have I, a weary slave, contemplated flight. Davno ustali rab, zamyslil ya pobieg. In the autumn of 1834, Pushkin went to Boldina hoping for another miraculous surge of creativity. But when he was there, he had to state with sadness, "Poems no longer come into my head." So during his last stay in Boldina, Pushkin, still bitter from his encounters with the Tsar, wrote just one work, The Tale of the Golden Cockerel. In this work, he was able to give eloquent expression to the deep resentment he felt at the indignities he had suffered in the course of 1834 at the hands of Tsar Nicholas I and agencies of the Russian state. I will now provide a brief outline of the plot in each of the 3 works, with particular reference to the statue motif, which is our theme tonight. First, the stone guest. Don Juan, who is described by other characters in the play as a sly seducer and godless libertine, has been sent into exile for having killed Don Alvaro in a duel. Don Alvaro is referred to in Pushkin's work as the Comendador, in Russian simply Commandor. The play opens with Don Juan's unauthorized return to Madrid from exile. With his servant Leporello, he is hiding in a monastery, posing as a monk, when in the cemetery attached to the monastery, he encounters the Comendador's widow, Doña Ana. She has come to visit the grave of her late husband, the Comendador. A large statue of the Comendador looms over his grave. Don Juan reveals to Doña Ana that he is not a monk, but a nobleman called Don Diego, who has fallen in love with her. Doña Ana invites him to visit her at her house and leaves the monastery. The first excerpt we're going to read starts at this point, opening with a conversation between Don Juan and Leporello. Don Juan then arrogantly invites the statue of the Comendador to stand watch during his meeting with Doña Ana. The statue nods. The final scene of the play takes place during Don Juan's visit to Doña Ana's house, and we will be reading most of that scene. In the course of their meeting, Don Juan reveals his true identity, proclaims his undying love for Doña Ana, and kisses her. Suddenly, they hear the heavy steps of the stone Comendador. Doña Ana faints. The statue extends a hand to Don Juan. He boldly takes it. The statue tells Don Juan, "It's all over. Sio conchina." And they both descend through the floor. Now the Bronze Horseman. Many critics consider the Bronze Horseman, along with Eugene Onegin, as Pushkin's greatest achievement. In it, the poet addresses philosophical, political, and social issues and highlights the enduring theme of Russian history, the uncompromising nature of the relationship between ruler and ruled. The Bronze Horseman is simultaneously an ode to St. Petersburg and its creator, Peter the Great, and a reflection on the place of the common man in history and a hierarchy in which the ordinary citizen has no say at all. At the beginning of the poem, Pushkin talks about the construction of St. Petersburg and about Peter the Great, under whose leadership the city was built. Peter's achievements are symbolized in his monument, which became known as the Bronze Horseman, thanks to Pushkin's poem. What thoughts are pressing on that brow? Within him, what unbounded force? Какая дума на челе, какая сила в нем сокрыта. However, the main theme of the work is the situation of the small man, the ordinary resident of a big city. In the first part of the poem, the author describes the greatness of St. Petersburg, its streets, bridges, and white knights. He then introduces the reader to his hero, Yevgeny. Pushkin does not even give him a surname, emphasizing by this that Yevgeny could stand for any citizen of St. Petersburg at this time. Indeed, Yevgeny is just another ordinary resident of St. Petersburg, a petty civil servant who is in love with his sweetheart Parasha and is going to marry her. Parasha lives in a wooden house on the outskirts of the city. When the historic flood of 1824 begins, her house is washed away and Parasha dies. Pushkin's description of the flood is extremely powerful. The whole city is washed away and many people die. Only the monument to Peter proudly rises above the flooded city. Yevgeny saves himself by sitting on top of one of two marble lions in front of a mansion overlooking Senate Square. Pushkin describes him sitting there, surrounded by water and looking across at the statue of the Bronze Horseman. However, all his thoughts are about Parasha only. When the flood subsides and he eventually finds out that her house has been destroyed and that Parasha has died, he is absolutely crushed by what has happened and loses his sanity. the unfortunate Yevgeny forgets about his civil service duties and his rented room and becomes a homeless vagabond. One day, Yevgeny finds himself in the same place in Senate Square where he had been in the immediate aftermath of the flood. The excerpt which Anthony and then Allah are going to read starts at this point and will take us to the end of the poem. Yevgeny suddenly realizes who the guilty one is, Tsar Peter, who had built the city in a place prone to floods. In a fit of rage, he threatens the monument to Peter the Great, the bronze horseman. "Miracle builder, now," he hissed, "just you wait." However, his weakened mind plays a cruel joke on him, and it seems to Yevgeny that in response to the insult, the autocrat on the bronze horse gets off his pedestal and begins to pursue him. The story ends sadly. Yevgeny's body is found on the threshold of a little house which had been destroyed by the flood on a small island in the river Neva. Throughout the poem, there is a contrast between Yevgeny and Peter the Great, between the insignificant little man and state power. While the sovereign leads the whole country forward, he has no business with, nor any time for, the fate of ordinary people. And Yevgeny's quiet protest, expressed to the bronze monument, is a protest against such an attitude on the part of the autocratic state. But the fate that befell Yevgeny shows that even such an utterly harmless rebellion by an ordinary person is likely to attract a harsh response from the state. Thus, in the view of Roman Jakobson, in Pushkin's poem, the bronze horseman symbolizes Tsar Peter, the city of St. Petersburg, and the uncanny reach of autocracy over the lives of ordinary people. Now, the golden cockerel. Pushkin's tale is set in the land of Tsar Dadon, who is trying to protect his rich kingdom from hostile neighbors. Besieged on all sides and unable to protect his country, he sends for an astrologer, the wise man and eunuch, who seems to have the answer. The astrologer gives him a statuette of the golden cockerel, which, if set on a spire, in the event of any approaching danger, will crow and turn to face the direction from which Dadon's kingdom is threatened. The Tsar is so pleased that he promises to grant whatever wish the astrologer has, as if it were his very own. The magic cockerel proves to be the perfect guard for Tsar Dadon's kingdom, and bellicose neighbors are unable to invade. 2 years pass. The cockerel then crows on 3 separate occasions. On the first occasion, he crows to warn that an enemy army is advancing towards Tsar Dadon's land. The Tsar sends his elder son at the head of a mighty army to fight the approaching foe. The kingdom is saved, but the Tsar's son and army never return. The cockerel crows a second time, as another army is advancing to capture Dadon's land. This time, he sends his younger son and another army. But once again, though the kingdom is saved, neither the son nor the army ever returns. The cockerel then crows for a third time, sounding the alarm that yet a third army is planning to invade. This time, Dadon himself leads the army to the farthest borders of his kingdom. On arriving there, he looks down a deep ravine and sees his dead army. To his horror, he discovers the body of his two sons, who it would appear have killed each other in front of a richly decorated tent. Tsar Dadon is overcome with grief, but suddenly the beautiful queen of Samarkand emerges from the tent, and Dadon immediately falls in love with her. He forgets the deaths of his sons and stays with the queen in her tent for 7 days. Then he and the queen of Samarkand leave together for his capital. Starting from this point, we will be reading the tale to the end. But in front of the capital's gates, they encounter the astrologer, who reminds Dadon of his promise and claims the enchanting queen for himself as his reward. Tsar Dadon is enraged and not only denies the astrologer his reward, but strikes him with his staff and kills him. Vsia stolitsa sodragнулась. The whole city, having witnessed the Tsar's crime, trembled with fear. The golden cockerel then flies down from its steeple and lands on Dadon's head. The statuette pecks Dadon to death for having killed its master, the astrologer. Some general observations on those three works. Roman Jakobson noted that the common feature of all three works is the vivid description of the sound of moving statues. The heavy stamping of the bronze horseman corresponds to the heavy shaking of the right hand of the Commendador statue and the heavy stamping of his steps. The light ringing of the golden cockerel's flight resembles the hard ringing galloping of the bronze horseman. Jakobson also pointed out that in all three works, the protagonist dies as a result of the intervention of a moving statue. In two of these cases, the statue itself embodied a deceased person. The Commendador in the monument above his grave, and Peter the Great in the bronze horseman. In the case of the golden cockerel, of course, it was the owner of the sculpture, the astrologer, who, quotes, became the deceased person. So in all these works, the statue can, to some extent, be seen as embodying death, and then putting to death those who in one way or another challenge it. In the case of the stone guest, it was the rebellious Don Juan who challenged the statue of the Commendador, the champion of order and morality. In the case of the bronze horseman, the ordinary man, the poor clerk Yevgeny, loses his sanity and challenges Peter the Great's statue, the embodiment of state authority and of the state's need to found a new capital. Both the stone guest and the bronze horseman convey Pushkin's pessimistic view on what the future holds for people who dare to challenge society's moral code or who dare to raise their voice against the state's empire-building priorities which override the life and happiness of its subjects. The case of the golden cockerel is completely different. The cockerel is presented as an animated sculpture which can turn around and sound the alarm. It is a faithful defender, not only of the Tsar Dadon, but also of all the ordinary people of his kingdom, who, thanks to its intervention, are spared foreign invasion and can live in peace. After Dadon kills the astrologer, the lawless murderer, the Tsar, is punished for his crime by the cockerel with death. And in the last line of his tale, the author warns all future holders of power to take care not to trespass against the rule of law. This my tale, although not true, holds a lesson, folk, for you. Сказка ложь, давней намек, добрым молодцам урок. It seems that Pushkin has never been so relevant to modern times as in 2020. We can see that in these three works by Pushkin, all the protagonists are either rebelling or trespassing, and that their rebellion or trespassing is thwarted or suppressed by the state, by the statute. Pushkin leaves us with a number of meaningful hints for the tale of the Golden Cockerel. However, the poet disguised these hints with great care, for the addressee of this charming fairy tale is Tsar Nicholas I himself. The quarrel between the astrologer and the Tsar has definite autobiographical features. The autobiographical hints are evident in Pushkin's manuscript. In a loose sheet, Pushkin had written, "But it is bad to quarrel with Tsars. No s tsariami plokho vzdorит." He suggested that such a quarrel could finish with the death of the Tsar's opponent. In the published edition of the work, however, this line was changed and shows clear signs of self-censorship. It reads, "But it's costly to fool with some people. No sinim nakladna vzdorит." These hints, as well as the ironic attitude displayed by the author towards the main character, Tsar Dadon, give reason to believe that the tale of the Golden Cockerel is a none too thinly veiled political satire, but one done with sufficient subtlety to get past the censor. In conclusion, in these three works, we have the tragedy of a man who rebelled against the strict mores of society, an epic poem in which the founder of St. Petersburg and the beautiful city which was his creation are glorified, but at the same time, the question is asked whether such great achievements should be founded on the suffering and sacrifice of ordinary people. And finally, a subtle political satire which the censorship was not able to crack. Tsar Nicholas forbade the publication of the Bronze Horseman. It was published only after Pushkin's death, with the editing which Pushkin's friend Zhukovsky had to agree to in order to get the work past the censor. But the Golden Cockerel was published immediately on its presentation, with only some minor deletions being demanded by the censor. And in all three works, moving statues play the most significant role. They either quench the rebellion or deliver justice. That is the end of my introduction, ladies and gentlemen.